Hi, my name is Benjamin Buclet. I'm the director of CREED, Center for Research on Expertise in Education and Development. I'm a socio-economist specialized in the development sector. I've worked about 10 years as a researcher, and then I've been responsible of projects and programs related to research for development. Meaning by that research which aims not only to produce knowledge but also to have concrete effects and consequences on development issues. CREED is partner of WNSC projects. We are responsible of training sessions and also of a study tour where we'll welcome our Asian partners in Europe. And our participation to WNSC project is very much incentivized by the exchanges between researchers all over the world around two major issues that are water and natural resources management and sharing of knowledge in the development sector. So this is particularly relevant for CREED, which aims to produce knowledge useful for development questions, to participate to WNSC projects, and it has been we have been associated since the beginning of this project, and hopefully will continue working with all the partners. So during this plenary session I'm going to talk about a big surprise about knowledge and development. So this is two issues I know pretty well through my own experience and also through specific researchers I've had the opportunity to implement. The major point I want to make is that there is a big difference between theory and practice. Research and production of knowledge is commonly supposed to have a very positive consequences on development issues, be them NGOs, universities, donors, or any development actors. There is this common acceptation that knowledge is necessary, useful, and probably on the basis of any development issue. So this is theory, but in practice it is very different because production of knowledge is also a professional activity which has to follow some rules, as is the development sector. So development workers, development professionals have also to follow rules. And the observation of the professional practice in the development sector and in the research field show that it is not that easy to conciliate both of them. And these difficulties are reinforced by the transformation of the knowledge sector. Universities are not the only producers of knowledge, the only ones, and their legitimacy and their credibility is challenged by other producers of knowledge, such as think tanks, NGOs, medias. Whoever wants to disseminate information and knowledge can do it through Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, or any social networks. This challenge related to the information and communication technology is doubled by, I would say, globalization, considering that many powerful forces, most of all related to international companies, are based on considering human beings as consumers more than as anything else, and certainly more than citizens. And being considered as a core consumer, they certainly don't have interest to promote knowledge and critic approaches by individuals. Most of all, no, it is the opposite. They have to promote, I would say, ignorance, so that you remain a blind consumer and you don't think too much, being able to receive the messages of marketing. The point I want to make here, most of all in front of young people involved in water and natural resources management issues, is that knowledge produced through scientific exercise is valuable and should be promoted compared to any sort of knowledge, or pretended as well, as so, pretended as so. Of course, it is easy to say it, and actually, I think my intervention in this plenary session will end with a question to people. How can we promote scientific knowledge, and what is the right way to do it? People in universities are not necessarily skilled for that. Shall we, all of us, turn into communication people? This is a big question. To what extent should we transform our practice in order to be heard, in order to be listened to, and in order to have more impact? Because after all, research for development is very much a question of impact. Otherwise, we would produce papers, PhDs, theses, etc., which would remain in libraries. This is not what research for development is about. It is about having some impact on serious issues such as water and natural resources management. So this is Saturday afternoon. All of you are tired, me too. So I decided to change the topic. Actually, I'm going to talk about something much more important. I'm going to talk about a war we are involved in, and you particularly, a war against aliens. And I will demonstrate how important it is you to get involved with it. And actually, I will even try to recruit you as soldiers. Really? No, it's not funny. Obviously, I will start talking about knowledge and development, from principle to practice. I have several problems in life. First of all, I'm lazy, like many people. The second problem you probably have also is that I spend too much time in front of screens, in front of my computer, in front of internet. And the third one, which is not that important, but I don't like PowerPoint at all. So when I had to find something to say about knowledge and development, the first thing I did, I suppose you do the same, because I'm not original and neither are you. I went on Google. Google is great when you have a question. You know the tools, right? You know Google. You write your question and you have an answer. So this is the basic tool for researchers, right? We don't really need anything else. Just Google. So this is what I did. And as I told you, I'm kind of lazy, so I didn't even look at the first results because I would have to read the results. I only look at the pictures. So at least I understand more easily. I can go quickly and then move on something more interesting. So here is what I found. Typing knowledge, right? So it's interesting. As I told you, I'm lazy, so I don't go even further than the first or 2 pages of Google. It's not necessary. You find everything you need in the first 2 pages. I'm kidding with that, but I think it's interesting. Thank you. It's interesting to give an idea of the common sense, of the general acceptation of something when you put knowledge on Google. Basically, the algorithm of Google shows you the most shared results. So it gives you an idea of what knowledge means for the world. basically, because Google is really used wild world. So when you digit Google, knowledge, sorry, you have this kind of representations with icons, generally with one head, one body. Well, here we don't really know what kind of people it is. If it's a man or a woman, we don't know. There is this icon of a lamp bulb, like evoking ideas, thinking. And very often there is these gear wheels. I think it's gear wheels or gear wheel, but I think it's gear wheels. You know, this wheels with dents that if you turn one, it will move the other one, etc. So these gear wheels, another representation. So you have the head, the brain, and the gear wheels. They are supposed to provoke some kind of action. When you activate one of them through a more or less complicated mechanism, they will at the end move another one. So it's a very, if you digit knowledge on Google, you'll see them. It's probably on the first page, really. And I thought it was quite interesting to look at this representation, generally accepted, considering knowledge as something mechanic, something logic, that can also be organic. There is also this representation, but the idea is more or less the same, that there is a causality pushing something through development of knowledge, you would reach to another situation. How it happens, of course, graphic representation is a bit limited to tell you how it happens. But still, I thought it was quite satisfying for me to find how knowledge is considered worldwide. So, because I was satisfied, I moved on and I Googled development. Same thing, only looking at pictures. It is quite interesting because you find exactly the same kind of gear wheels. Sometimes the representations are a bit more mechanics. You also have the icons, slightly different icons. You can look, there are targets, the same lamp bulb, people, there's a tie. Bon, I don't know why, but probably because in development people are serious, like Alexis with his tie. There is this handshake, which is quite interesting as well. It means that the development evokes relationships between people. There is this, how do you call that? This thing you use to speak loud. Loudspeaker, that's it? Okay, let's try that, loudspeaker. And so I suppose it evokes advocacy. And there is also a note, some money, you know. This is kind of interesting as well, calendar. But still the same idea of gear wheels. So you push something, you move something, and through some kind of mystical mechanism, it will at the end actionate the last one. And here you have the people with the ties moving around these wheels. When I found out that representation of development was really similar to knowledge, I thought that this presentation would be quite short, because basically knowledge and development, if they are the same, okay, principle to practice, the presentation would finish now. Of course, it's a simplification, it's a graphic, so reality is a bit different. And actually, oops, sorry. I remember yesterday, Pierre-Yves talked about modern water, and it reminds me that maybe this representation would be comparable to, would be a modern presentation of research, of knowledge and development, be it a little bit simplified, answering to mechanism, answering to logic, answering to the production of things, production of knowledge, production of development projects, program that you can elaborate, you can buy, you can sell, you elaborate ideas, etc. And the last one here is interesting because it's as if the two guys were pushing the wheels, but they're not rolling. And there is no way through this position that the wheels rolls. It's impossible. So they would confront. And it's kind of interesting to think that development is also a question of confrontation when you think about the historical way, the historical component of the concept of development, which has been basically created after the Second World War. And this representation comes from the UN. So if some of you have had the opportunity to work with United Nations organizations, you would not be surprised that the wheels don't really roll, because it's kind of complicated to move on with these organizations. So rather satisfied, I went on and digited the knowledge and development, because Google is great. You can put several words on the search engine. And Google and knowledge and development gives you some more complicated results. You have a lot of graphs like that, this kind of representations showing other concepts. Here you have transformation, operationalize, policies, systems, targets, transformation. So it evokes the fact that, okay, it's not that easy. The conception of development and knowledge together, it might be not that modern, as I said earlier. So it might be a bit more complicated. Of course, you find other representations. Some of them are poetic, like this one. It can be artistic, quite beautiful to my taste. For some of them, you really need assistance and psychological assistance, I would say. Absolutely understandable, and you would find these kind of things. You know how torture research and development can be sometimes. Unfortunately, the World Bank is here. This is the best representation I have found to explain how things are easy and simple to understand. Which is fantastic in this picture is that the two guys, men, women, you know, I speak in American English, so we talk about guys. They are men or women, we don't care. So these two guys can be things also in American English. This is kind of surprising sometimes, but it's how it is. So these two guys are looking at each other, which is great because, you know, development, exchange, cooperation, so they look at each other. So the hypothesis of all this process is that we look at each other, which is great in principle. But in real life, sometimes people really don't look at each other. And what I found fantastic about it is that they have exactly the same configuration of gear wheels. If you look at that, can I move until there? It's okay. Here, 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 exactly the same. Here again, in their brain, the only difference is the color. But basically, it means that if you turn your little gear wheels in your nose, something will happen. This is this magical side of development and research, that with some kind of, I don't know, effect, your wheels will go from one to the other. And it's interesting also because the colors are going from one way to the other and the opposite also. So it means that development, and it is precisely the name, well, it's very, oh no, it's not that small. Using knowledge, better development results. So it's really the topic produced by the World Bank. The idea is that there is an exchange of gear wheels. By how it happens, we don't really know either. But still, this is the idea. And after that, I found another picture that explains how it happens. There is a machine, transfer machine, which
allow you don't even have to do anything, just read your newspaper, and this exchange of gear wheels from your nose to the other's nose works. So I was really reassured by the situation. This is very simplified and somehow ridiculous, what I just said. But my point is that there is this common acceptation that knowledge is absolutely fundamental for any development process, right? If you ask to any development institution, any public institution, NGO, even private companies, nobody will deny that. Knowledge is absolutely fundamental to enlighten decision be it private, public, or collective, or individual, or whatever. So this is this idea, without the knowledge, you can invest everything you want, you won't be efficient, it will be never enough. So obviously, if these guys had the knowledge that scale is better used vertically, he would have reached the other side of the wall much quicker. So after that, putting this statement on the table with you, okay? Knowledge is fundamental, is essential, is necessary for development. And after that, I thought about my own experience. Okay, I won't talk about me too long, because it's not that interesting, but I have had the opportunity to work in NGOs, I did research, I published, I talked in front of students, taught, etc., etc., then integrated an institution dedicated to research for development, and then worked a lot as a consultant, etc., etc. And I thought that it was not exactly, that it was not exactly the reflect of my experience. Then I went back to the internet. I told you I spent a lot of time in front of my computer, and I read a study by the Smithsonian Institute about publications, about research products, papers. And in this study, the Smithsonian Institutes say that every year 1.8 million scientific articles are published. 1.8 million articles are published in about 20,000 journals. So it's a lot. And in this study by the Smithsonian Institute, they also say that 50%, half of the papers published, so if I'm not wrong, it's about 900,000 articles, are never read by anyone other than the writer, the author, the referees, and the journal editors. Every year, 500,000 papers. I'm sure here no one is in this situation. I'm sure all of you have written papers that have been read by tons of people. But 50% of the papers produced are not read, basically. And they also say that 90% of these 1.8 million articles are never cited, never quoted. So it gives you an idea of the effort we do. We, I mean, when I say we, I talk about us, academics and researchers and people trying to produce this knowledge and turn our small gear wheels in our mind, etc. It gives you an idea of the use, the utility of these efforts we do. So I thought, yeah, okay, if all this knowledge produced is not used by anyone, is not read, is not cited, even by other academics, who will read it? I mean, really. Okay, so this is not that easy. And why is not that easy? And finally, I go to the second part of the title of my thing, research in practice. So how is it in practice, research, production of knowledge? Research in practice is not only turning your gear wheels, right? It starts by many years of studies. Some of you are still studying. I mean, we may be studying all our lives, actually. But still you have to study to have a degree, a diploma. Then you have to find out where you're going to work. You have to find the institution, the sector, the topics you like, and you want to be happy in your professional life, and you have to find a job. So once you have a job, you think, okay, maybe I'm a made man, I will be happy, and everything is fine. But no, of course, you have to write again, work, and you have to get some funding. In order to get some funding, you have to write proposals. Because research is, as any professional sector, is a competitive sector, and financial resources are not given. So you have to write proposal, you have to learn how to write proposal, and hopefully you get some money to do your research. So you are a happy fellow, you do your research, you experiment your things, you collect your data, you do your analysis. Easy to say, doing your research, you have to deal with people, and people are complicated. You have to deal with people, for example, in social sciences, you have to collect data, interviewing people, for example. You might have to deal with teams of researchers, even harder to deal with teams of researchers than to collect data among population, right? Because you would need some leadership capacities. And this is definitely not something you learn at school, leadership capacities. When you do your PhD, have you ever had a course in leadership? How to become a leader and lead your teams of researchers? No. You have to manage financial resources also. This is tricky because your donor has terrific rules, administrative rules, and maybe you would need to spend this amount of money, but you will need a receipt, but the receipt must have the VAT number, and the VAT number must go to the accountant, and the accountant has the rules of the institution and the rules of the European Union to follow, etc., etc. Of course, you have not learned that during your PhD, but you frequently have to deal with that. You might also have to deal with quality issues, to deal with international norms sometimes. In some cases, you have to deal with legal issues, ethics, intellectual property. When you collect data through interviews and through large-scale questionnaires, there is a question, an issue of intellectual property. And once you have done your research and produced your results, you can finally rest as a happy academic and being praised by the whole world. Of course not. You have to work again, you have to write. You have to write your papers, the papers which will not be read. You have to write it, and you have to communicate. You have to like as I'm doing, but instead, the only difference is that I have nothing to tell you, but I'm here, and people who would have things to tell you would be here also. You might have to teach also. You have to deal with students. Students can be nasty and really awful, and of course participate to conferences like this one, being inspiring and inspired. So as you see, in practice, it is very, very different than the simple representation of gear wheels that I found on Google. So I was quite happy to find the limitations of Google. I should publish that, actually, to show the world that Google is not that fantastic. What about development in practice? Development, you might not be that familiar with development, maybe unless some of you have had previous experience on or work with development institutions and or NGOs or things like that. But the development sector is a very diversified sector of activity. But one important thing is the expertise. So you will have in the development sector to be considered as an expert, which is something that you don't know why, you don't know when, but you reach a point in your career and suddenly somebody calls you expert. There is absolutely no rational reasons for that. But, okay, you are an expert. We need an expert. Okay, are you an expert? We are. Okay, I'm an expert. So this is what you are when you work in the development sector. Here also you will have to deal with human diversity, many people. And here also you have to deal with institutions, rules, accountability, and sometimes understandable rules, sometimes not understandable. More than in the research field, you will have to deal with what we call tools, engineering for development. You will have to deal with tools such as the log frame, the logical framework, which is, I see Stéphane laughing because, of course, to set up the WANASI project, we have to produce a log frame, a logical framework, which is a representation of a project based on general objectives, specific objective, expected results, activities, means necessary, indicators, and means of verifications, hypotheses, risk, and these kind of things. I tell you, this is going a little bit old-fashioned. Now you have to move to TOC, because log frame is out of fashion. TOC is theory of change. So now the new thing is TOC. Go on with that. It's the next step. So you have to deal with this kind of tools that might be interesting. Now I'm being a little bit cynical, but sometimes it's very interesting to work with that, and it can be useful to communicate at least, and to give a synthesis of the goals and strategy of a project. So you have also to deal with bureaucracy. You have to deal with partnership. A partnership is a very important rhetoric in development because, of course, you can't do development on your own. You have to work with other people, partners. You have to deal with field activities. It is something that we find also in many scientific activities, to go on the field, collect data. It can be complicated in some contexts. It can be dangerous. In some countries, you would face security issues that will make your life exciting, maybe, but kind of dangerous also. You will have meetings, outside meetings. You will have inside meetings also. You will have negotiations to do to find a way to move on your project, as in many professional sectors, actually. Maybe more than others, you will face cultural differences, misunderstandings, because the idea, these two heads from the World Bank, in reality are not exactly the same. The wheels are not configured the same way, so you might not understand everything. And you will also experiment conflicts, some hidden conflicts, some explicit conflicts, and evaluation. Evaluation is something very important also in the development sector. So, as you see, it's very different from these representations of the gear wheels, starting from one point, leading to another, following some kind of mechanical process, right? And now, knowledge and development in practice. You remember this representation. So now when you look at it, what do you think? What do you think? Is it how it happens? It's not how it happens. So this confirms that the World Bank representation is quite simplistic, right? And actually, production of knowledge and research as development are two professional sectors with their rules, with their actors, having interests, having their own way of seeing things, a diversity of actors that can be in competition, internally, externally also. This is what we call in sociology a field of competition, where the actors compete between themselves in order to have the power to define and to influence the rules of the field, right? So basically, this is more what knowledge and development in practice is. And I found, and there is absolutely no cynicism about that, I found a representation that is more, how do you say that? That is more representative of reality, I think. You know, there is this, it's kind of old now, but it's very interesting. On the internet you find many of these conferences where there is a guy talking and there is somebody drawings. And actually it must probably have taken 1 hour to draw this drawing. But basically it's an illustration of the talk of the guy. And basically it shows how complex it is to transfer knowledge in order to provoke changes. Of course you can't see anything really here, but I have put the website, which should be readable. It's called theimpactinitiative.net, and I think it's quite interesting to go and see how it works. And there is also this representation of word clouds, which gives a more subtle illustration of how knowledge and development relate. You have, of course, the words and knowledge development. Oh, there is information quite big, but also tons of words, design, support, system, engineering, cross-functional, different process, etc., etc. So it is very interesting to also look at these representations in order to keep in mind the complexity of this world, of these two professional sectors. But anyway, it is still a beautiful idea, and we academics have an important responsibility. Most of all us here all of us are interested in issues and subjects that have consequences on societies, on maybe the planet. So it is very important us to keep in mind that we have somehow a responsibility to promote knowledge as an important thing for development, right? Because there is something you probably know. Higher education institutions are part of this world. We are not only surrounded by researchers and developers. Of course, in our professional life, we have many colleagues that are doing research, producing knowledge, not necessarily only academics, but still. You might have also friends, colleagues working on development issues, but the world goes a little bit further than that. And because higher education institutions are part of the world, higher education institutions had to deal with something that happens these last 30, or maybe more than that actually, but let's take 30 years, the digital revolution, right? And higher education institutions had to face this information and communication technology. Whatever you think about it, higher education institutions these last 30 years have been basically crushed by information, media industry, what we call happening journalism, and knowledge based on scientific research has absolutely no power and is not listened to compared to journalism, media, internet, TV, etc., etc. Whatever you think, this is a reality. It's kind of sad, I think. But the reality is that academics are totally overwhelmed by information. And this has consequences on students. What happens in universities, well, maybe you guys who are used to teach, you will tell me if it's true or not. But my own experience is that students are on their screens, even if they're high. It can have consequences on the teachers also. Many teachers, well, this one is quite old, but many teachers have a hard time to face the changes of their students. And the most important thing, and which is a reality, is that very often students have access to data, to information more easily than the teachers. And specifically in contexts I've had the opportunity to visit, you will have a teacher, certain, well, kind of old teacher, maybe younger than this one, but still, reading his book in front of 300 or 2,000 students. Some of the students are writing what they listen to when it's the book of the guy, so they can buy the book or photocopy the book. And the other on the internet, looking for more relevant data, looking for database, for websites, and things like that. And for many old teachers, it is a very serious issue to change their way of teaching. And of course, this stress on the academy, on the teaching methods and students also, has been tremendously reinforced by the social media. And talking very often to rectors, presidents of universities, I can tell you there is a serious identity crisis in higher education institutions. They don't really know how to deal with this transformation. They don't really know what is their role in this world. 50 years ago, it was kind of obvious, you know. This is where knowledge is produced, it's university. But now it's not the only place. They have competitors everywhere, NGO, media, think tanks produce really valuable knowledge. When you look in big NGOs, when you look at the profile of the people working there, many doctors are producing excellent works. So university is not at all the only place where knowledge is produced. And as in many situations, universities are competing one to each other, competing with other producers. And this situation of stress in terms of institutional strategy has provoked some reactions, and very often when you're stressed, you tend to look at yourself and to preserve what you have instead of questioning the funds of the basis of your identity and your activity. And we observe some kind of risk aversion behavior in higher education institutions that probably damages many objectives they would have in order to go back to the front row of production of knowledge. So it is very important higher education institutions go back on the field, because all this information we receive, and researchers, students, all this information is absolutely useless if it is not transformed into knowledge. You know that, because without transforming information into knowledge, you can't move to action. There is no way. And this is probably hope for universities, is that they are still the only translators that can take information, that have time to transform it into knowledge. So they would still have a role to play. This is personally my hope. So why is this important? Why? And this is the part I was mentioning at the very beginning of my talk. The trouble is that we have to deal with others, you know. It is kind of frightening, but it is the reality. Higher education institutions are not the only ones competing to influence policymakers. You are probably aware that lobbies are actively working in any space where power people are involved. Lobbies, interest groups from, for example, oil industry, have many guys in Brussels, in Washington, probably in Beijing too, in Hong Kong, in Singapore, everywhere, doing what they are paid for, trying to influence public collective decisions, policymakers. I'm not even talking about corruption, but as they are doing their job, giving advice, producing also what they call knowledge. Oil industry, chemicals, insurance, big corporations, agro-business, tourism, drugs, weapons, all these industries have millions of people paid to influence policymakers. And they master marketing techniques, they master business, and they know absolutely what to do to reach their goals. Which is pretty preoccupying when you think that in higher education institutions have absolutely no means to hire 1 million people promoting scientific knowledge to influence public policies. So I don't want to be dramatic here, but if I think about what have been presented this morning, I'm pretty sure that fish farms or fish farmers or tourism industry might not be willing to disseminate some cost-benefits analysis of the mangrove. You know, this is information and scientific knowledge that is interesting for us, but maybe for fish farmers it's not really a good thing to have it disseminated. Same thing about plastic producers. They probably don't want to integrate in the international agreements some enlightened decisions that would have been created through a serious analysis of the situation and all the legal apparatus that exists. Politicians are not necessarily happy to see the evaluation of their fishery reforms and effects of fishing lots to be disseminated, and because maybe it would show that their policies are not very efficient and it might have consequences on their re-election. So this is not big lobbying, but you can see, my point is here, that there are adverse actors that exist, that are here, and we have to deal with them, we academics, right? So I will finally conclude. Information and communication technology, digital revolution is a fact. We can't deny it. We have to live with it. Lobbies exist. It is also a fact. Competition between knowledge producers, competition between higher education institutions as well, between research institutions exist as well. This is a fact. Complexity of development sector is also a fact. We find a lot of ambiguities in agendas of these organizations, of actors, individual, collective, etc. So if you consider all these facts, it seems that we are facing a real challenge. We, once again, academics, producers of scientific knowledge, we are facing a real challenge which might be really urgent to overcome because of the situation, which is actually a fight
and when I talk to you that you would be soldiers, it is actually what we are. And it is, to a certain extent, one of the goals of Wanasi and Dockside, I don't know to what extent, but Wanasi project have precisely this goal to give young generation the means to produce knowledge which will have an influence, which will have effects, impact on very concrete issues that societies are facing nowadays, be it in cities, in countryside, international issues. I mean, we need enlightened knowledge, we need scientific knowledge. You know, Pierre Bourdieu used to say that sociology is a combat sport. And Dominique Volton, he talks about the battle of knowledge as the next decisive battle. So I have a question for you to finish my talk. I have a question for you. And as I forgot to move on my slide, but anyway, it's okay. Yes, I had this guy also. Where is he? Yeah, this guy about the fact that we have very powerful people denying scientific knowledge. Anyway, so how can we win the battle of knowledge? How can we move on that? How can we win this battle so that scientific knowledge is listened to, that scientific knowledge is not the last one that the decision makers will see after having looked at Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, the think tank production, the NGO production, and then when scientific production will be reachable by people who take the decision. So as I told you, I'm quite lazy, so I want you to answer this question. And I have a survey monkey process here. If you go on the internet, you digit this code here, X93L2ZS, and you can answer these questions. Of course, I have personally some hypotheses. I think communication is essential. I think also the way we produce knowledge should be different than what it is now, and that the 900,000 papers that are produced every year are a waste of time and energy, and you should probably, and we should probably change the way we show the results of our knowledge. So please, of course we can discuss about that now. Please go on this SurveyMonkey thing if you have ideas about how we can win this battle. And I don't want to be too dramatic, and because actually I think it's quite an emergency for us to be able to answer and to win this battle. Some of you know that already, but I always finish with these pictures because I think that we never must lose hope. Look at that. This is absolutely fascinating. The battle is not lost. And sometimes we can have a little bit of help from magic, you know. So thank you.